Paul, when you were an early supporter, in fact, you were with us at the very first World Vasectomy Day in Adelaide.
I can still smell it.
Yeah, fantastic. You wrote a letter of support to us, to Jonathan, in those days, and even then, going back looking at that letter, you warned that the world was facing not only severe weather issues and long-term climate change, but you mentioned in that letter novel epidemics being a threat to humanity.
Gretchen Daly and I actually wrote an article in, I think it was 1996, pointing out the problem in China with the wet, the duck, pond, pig system, and so on as a likely source. And we weren't pioneers in that. We were copying from people who had been writing about the issues of pandemics, as we had been, Ann and I had been, in things like a population resource environment in the 60s. It was, in other words, the surprise that people have over the appearance of the COVID-19 problem is only a surprise to people who haven't paid any attention at all to what the public health community is trying to warn humanity about for decades.
How do you think the COVID world will relate to our response to the other unspoken challenge we face, which of course is our increasing population?
Well, of course, they're tightly tied together. In other words, one of the consequences of human vast overpopulation has been a reduction in biodiversity, which in turn has led to, in particular, higher populations of the kind of animals, particularly rodents, that share many of our. First of all, everybody has to remember that all human infectious diseases, as far as I know, came originally from other animals. And so when we fool around changing dramatically the mix of other animals on the planet, we are, that's one way of exposing ourselves to novel pathogens, particularly viruses. The larger our population, the greater the chances are that one of those viruses will make the transition from an animal host into us. The more rapid our transport systems, the less chance we have of isolating it when it happens. We had a near thing with the Ebola virus not too long ago. And of course, we've had bad luck often in evolutionary terms with the very mutable flu viruses. So there's an immediate connection between the size of the human population and how vulnerable it is to pandemics. When 10,000 years ago, when we were hunter-gatherers, there was no way for there to be a virus disease that would take over the entire planet, because it would get into a group of people, but a group of people usually, particularly before the agricultural revolution, would be 50 to 100 to 150 people. And a couple of 10 or 20,000 years before that, those groups were really isolated. But even 10,000 years ago, if your group got infested, the odds were that everybody would be dead or immune before there was any way of contacting another group. Even in the, say, in the 1700s, if a plague ship left Hong Kong, it didn't get to Australia before everybody on board was immune or dead. The size of the human population and our technological changes have made us extraordinarily vulnerable to disease. And one of the ways to change that, of course, is to move to a situation where the average person feels they have to stop at one child. And one way to do this, which you probably haven't heard of, is by sterilizing males. It's, of course, a step, as you know, that I've taken. And I believe the only thing that I've recommended in this area that they haven't taken up is a little tattoo on the forehead to inform women that you're absolutely safe.
Well, people are very comfortable with tattoos these days, Paul. It seems, why not put it to good use? Now,
Exactly.
that presages the idea, which World Vasectomy Day is based on, is actually men taking an active role in family planning. They've tended to literally sit back and take it.
Absolutely. And I think right along with that, and I know you agree, we have to work incredibly hard to make women fully equal to men in terms of their opportunities, in terms of their pay, in terms of their ability to work. There's one of the main factors we know about in human biology is that if you give women equal opportunities with men and true equal rights, fertility rates go down. While we crusade for the men to get vasectomies, we should also crusade for women to have full access to modern contraception and to backup abortion and to full support from their mates. If we're going to solve the problems we face, horrendous as they are, we need a smaller population in which men and women work together to produce the kind of world that I think everybody wants.
Are there any positives you think coming out of the COVID world, assuming that we do, in terms of our understanding of the pressures of this continuing population growth that you've been talking about now for more than 50 years? Do you think it is the moment where we can realign our thinking about, the values and the necessities of actually living on a very constrained planet where we're all very much connected?
I don't think we have any other choice but to try desperately, even though I can't admit to being a wild optimist. When you see in the United States people willing to take up arms to preserve their liberty to not wear a mask, to not save their own lives and those of their loved ones, then you know that the day of the moron has arrived. Partly, I'm certain it traces to the fact that the United States is still a caste-ridden society where, for instance, it's very obvious that the huge vote for Trump is a racist vote, that people will vote for someone who works against all their interests as long as they can feel comfortable that they can stay in the dominant caste, that is being white. And you just got to face it. And it's one of the things we're going to have to deal with. And as you can see from the news, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And racism is really solidly entrenched in the United States, I hate to say.
So if we project forward a little bit, and let's say 300,000 to 400,000 Americans have died, perhaps as many as 2 million around the world, 15 to 20 million infections. Surely that is an inflection point. Isn't that a moment where it gives us an opportunity to recalibrate, to rethink, and replan? Given I understand, your understandable reluctance to accept that Americans are ever going to kind of work their way through this, is it the moment we've been waiting for?
I think it has to be. And we are involved in a couple of linked complex adaptive systems, which are the sorts of systems that we cannot predict exactly what's going to happen, but we know that they're going to be emergent properties. It's sort of like when you're driving on a freeway and all of a sudden you find that you're in a traffic jam. And when the jam clears, you can't see any reason why the jam started or why it cleared, but it's what's called an epiphenomenon of the complex adaptive system of everybody in their car trying to get someplace, trying to adapt to the traffic, and so on. And technically, we speak of things called basins of attraction, that systems can change dramatically and suddenly into a new form, which may be better or may be worse. And I think our big hope is to push us into a basin of attraction where people will understand that population is a big problem, will understand that skin color has nothing whatever to do with a person's value, intelligence, or anything else, where people will understand that we have to be more cooperative and less competitive in the way we deal with things, when people understand that we're facing global problems. And if we are going to solve global problems, we have to have global systems of governance to one degree or another, regimes of one sort, and that the number of children that one has is a big factor in your impact on other people and on the environment. There's an interesting study done not too long ago that shows that in a person in a rich country like the United States or Australia has one fewer child, that's the equivalent of 23 people giving up driving entirely in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So the fundamental problem is that we are genetically and culturally a small group animal. For most of human history, for at least a couple of million years, we lived, and our ancestors and our non-human ancestors lived in small groups where everybody knew each other, where everybody was genetically related, where when language had developed, everybody spoke the same language. And now we're struggling to learn to live in groups of millions and billions, and we're doing a crappy job of it. And most people don't realize we're even trying, but that's the trying I think we have to do if we're going to find the right basin of attraction where my great-grandchildren and your great-grandchildren will have something like a decent world to live in. If we've got 2 decades to do it, that's wonderful, although I have serious doubts if we have that much time.
You made the point there that, in fact, personal action can actually make a difference. Is that, you know, one vasectomy can actually make a very significant difference, and so collective action, therefore, is useful.
Absolutely. I mean, a vasectomy is like wearing a mask in a sense, in that it not only helps the entire society, but it helps you. It greatly relieves your relationship with those people that you're sexually involved with. And one of the weird things about the United States, and I think from my own experience in Australia, is that we're sex-riddled societies that don't want to talk about sex. Everything is sold on the basis of sex. You rarely see a brutally ugly man or a brutally ugly woman selling perfume or cars to you. And we just tend to ignore it, and we ignore it with our kids, although there are some cheery views. In the United States, for example, the frequency of unwanted pregnancies in young women has dropped quite dramatically, including in minority groups and so on. So it's not hopeless. Human behavior can change extremely rapidly. As we learned in 1941, consumption behavior can be changed almost instantaneously. There was an event in December 7th, 1941, where the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, where consumption in the United States was turned on its head virtually instantaneously. We went to rationing of all sorts of things: gasoline, rubber, aluminum, meat, and so on. And we had produced almost 4 million private cars in 1941, and the next 3 years we produced millions of tanks, planes, etc., and no more private cars. So we know we can change consumption, and that can be done fast. What we have to face is that the need to change the population size should have started 50 years ago, should start right now if we're going to do it humanely, because it's very important to remember that human population size will change. The issue is, do we change it humanely and consciously ourselves by controlling our birth rate, or do we sit back until the death rate goes up? Because as baseball fans all know, humanity, as somebody once said, humanity, it's the top of the ninth inning. Humanity is hitting nature hard, but you always have to remember that nature bats last.
Well, thank you, Paul. I think I don't have to ask you whether you're confident that this is the Germany marching into Poland moment, the day that will live in infamy, whether COVID is of a scale to bring us to that point of realization or not. I guess what we're seeing in America doesn't really fill us full of confidence about that.
At least around the world, other people are recognizing it. And with a new administration, which will still need a lot of pushing to get it in the right directions on a lot of issues, still, I have met Joe Biden. He's a person you can talk to. He comes across, and I think everybody says he's a nice guy. Ann and I had a weird half-hour discussion with him in an empty stairway in a hotel on Lake Como in Italy, because we were both at the same meeting. We were all at the same meeting when he was a senator, and we had a wonderful conversation, even though he didn't know us from a hill of beans. And he was right on track on many of the issues you and I care about. So there's some hope if he can actually get into the presidency.
Well, we all need to wish and hope that happens. Paul, thank you so much for joining us as ever, just illuminating the experience you bring to this topic and to life in general. We can't live without, and it's been wonderful to spend a little time with you. Thank you.
It's good to see you, and I'd love to spend time with you in 3 dimensions sometime again.
We hope to have you back in Australia very soon. It'll be at least.
I'm missing it right now. Take care.